marriage that suits both parties in that moment. I wonder whether there was a history of chemist shops, something with medicines. This is interesting too, because when I look at George Michael here, there's an indirect connection between him and Thomas Goldie. It's not like they knew each other that well, if at all, or there's a love there. Don't know, there's something there. So for this I need to discount Josephine, Lillian, this original Thomas here, and also a Francis Elizabeth there. People that interest me in this whole muddle and this whole mystery, it's George and Elizabeth. That's like the basis. That's the basis there. That's the basis of death and murder and confinement and unjust things. I have a feeling also that at some point Evelyn had carried her father's child. I feel that she was pregnant by her dad and had gone away and given birth to that child and then returned. And I feel she became pregnant with her father's child. And I feel that her father put her in a space as a punishment to her, because as far as he was concerned, that she did something so bad and so against God, and yet it was his fault entirely. I've kind of drawn like a stick man, and it's just to represent her, but I don't know how to interpret this, but she's in something here. It's like, I don't know, it's square, but I kind of put it in a space, and then I want to cover her over and hide her face, hide her. I remember picking up the word poison, the sense of somebody being poisoned, and as I'm just working here with this family tree, I just am only drawn to Elizabeth Day Leeson is here, which is Evelyn's mother, and that word, I put it like on her and around her, like she's poisoned, she'd taken poison, this kind of thing. And I feel that if poison was administered to her, this is certainly not a suicide, so I would absolutely suggest that poison was administered to her by her husband George, so that George gives his wife poison to kill her, knowing it will be very difficult to detect. Elizabeth feels murdered, and I feel there's poison involved in her murder, and it reminds me of Crippen. And I know that Crippen would have killed his victims and put them in acid bathtubs, and that's my feeling, that I'm covered in water, like I'm colouring her in because she's covered. Thomas Goldie and Evelyn were connected. You must know her from the space where she's been kept, because he was a doctor. I think they spoke together and fell in love from seeing each other daily in a space where she felt restricted, and in many ways he was her liberator.
Finally, after 100 years, the archive case files on Evelyn have been opened, and it is Vanessa who is the first to read the letters her grandmother wrote at the asylum.
The sense I get straight away from your grandmother is not being listened to, nobody's listening, and it feels that everything that she's trying to express is just being put away somewhere. And there's definitely a sense of a connection to somebody that works at that hospital or the institution where she was put. There's definitely a sense of either related to a doctor or some connection like that from your grandmother. But if you could read the letter that's here, that we have here,
yes,
that would help, because as you read and you put your emotion into that, I'll be able to sense and feel from your grandmother.
I'm sorry I was so disagreeable this afternoon, but I particularly wanted to speak to you alone.
I am naturally angry at being so constantly told by the staff here that I am mentally ill.
For I know quite well I am not.
I grant that I am exceedingly depressed, and shall continue to be so unless something is done in my interest, for it is simply beastly to feel all one's relatives are against you.
If I'm not uncertified, I intend making a jolly good old row.
I'm sincerely yours,
Evelyn F. Silly.
When nobody's listening, you do get hysterical, you do want to shout, you do want to scream, you do want to cry, and it's almost like there's part of her that lets her emotions go, and then it's a sense of, oh, now I've done that, they are gonna think I'm a loony. You know, it's almost like she's giving them the ammunition because of the way that she's being kept. But your grandmother was of sound mind, depressed, which we can all have, you know, but the depression is caused by grief, the depression is caused by sexual abuse, I believe. This is somebody very close to her. And I want to say it's her father, because every time I want to say that, I just feel that this is her father that's done it to her.
Well, that's really interesting you to say that, because in one of the case notes about her, it said that she would speak in the most vulgar and unladylike terms about her father.
Because I feel she thinks that people are letting her down because she's sending out these letters and nobody's responding. So in her mind, why aren't they responding? I don't feel that she necessarily believed her father was holding back. It was almost like his way of manipulating her. So nobody on the outside is listening, including her boyfriend. So that's why slowly her energy just drops and she just becomes more and more depressed. Yes. And then into this numbness that I feel very much from her. One of the documents that really interests me is this, which has been filled in by the doctors to commit her. I just feel like I want to tear it apart. When you fought so much and you're just not getting anywhere, that's how it feels. And by you taking up her case, you're giving it life, you're giving it the energy. And so in a way, you are helping your grandmother in spirit. It's like, I almost want to say to you, you're listening, somebody's listening, somebody's understanding.
Coming up, TJ finds out that the pain of the past is closer to the present day than she might have thought.
It's like this darkness around the heart that's been passed on for years.
And she gets the chance to psychometrize her grandfather's surgical instruments, with surprising results.
I'm not shy about stuff like that, you know. As soon as I sat down, that's what I could feel.
After spending a year in a lunatic asylum, Evelyn Silly returned home. Finding her mother dead in the bath on Christmas morning, she voluntarily returned to spend a further 13 years in psychiatric care. Evelyn would finally marry the man who would set her free, her therapist, Thomas Goldie-Scot.
In many ways, he was her liberator.
100 years later, her granddaughter Vanessa Goldie-Scot has asked the psychic private eyes to look into the mystery.
Well, I'd really like to know what they were doing to my grandmother and others while they were in the asylum. And then what really happened when she found her mother dead in the bath in her nightdress.
In one of the Goldie-Scot's former homes in Edinburgh, TJ meets with Vanessa. By focusing on palmistry, TJ hopes the spirit world will bring the past to the fore.
What I'd like you to do, Vanessa, is think about your great-grandmother, think about Evelyn very much, and just draw her energy towards you. And by you doing that, I'm going to focus on your hands, focus on your palms, and see if she can give me information. And as a link with your grandmother, Evelyn, I really feel like I'm going to burst into tears.
She makes me feel very sad when I look into her eyes.
She's showing me the colour red very prominently. It's almost like there's a backdrop or a background of red with her face coming off of it. It's like her whole life is just not what it could have been. Having a child was not what she thought it was going to be. Her father took any of that away from her.
There may well have been a sexual relationship between George and his daughter.
There's abuse, there's incest. See, your father's father didn't believe her about the abuse. It was almost, we won't talk about it anymore. And she was silenced, because if she'd have spoken about her father anymore, they would have constantly put her away. It's definitely a lady that was born before her time. The women in your family, Vanessa, have had to hold in their emotion, going right through to your generation. It's like this darkness around the heart that's been passed on for years, in tears that haven't been cried. I can see your grandmother with fine things around her, you know, like a nice china tea set. I want to just smash it all, and I just want to be free. And you understand that because you've had that in your own life. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
TJ has been given access to some surgical artifacts that belonged to Vanessa's grandfather. Using psychometry, the spirit of Thomas Goldie-Scot catches TJ off guard.
This object here makes me feel very funny, almost as if I don't want to touch it. So that'll be interesting when I unwrap that one. And this is literally a box full of his tools, of surgeon's tools. I can almost smell her grandfather as I'm linking in. So these are very personal, very private belongings to him. But this is something that he would have just kept with him. This is something very personal. I really do get a sense of pride, but I have to say the way that Vanessa's grandfather would have worked seems, the only word I know how to describe it as is quite raw. My whole pelvic area is pulling as I say that. And I am going to look at this item, but I feel almost very edgy, very nervous. It's very strange, the feelings I'm getting from this. It just feels very raw and gynecological. That's very much the feeling that I'm getting, but it's all my pelvic area. This is something that he would have. I want to say experiment. I know that probably sounds like the wrong word to use, but that's the feelings I'm getting from him. And I'm not shy about stuff like that, you know. But I feel like I want to giggle because in my mind I have this great-grandfather in my perception, you know, because this man is generations away from me, and he's looking at my bits. You know? As soon as I sat down, that's what I could feel. It's hormonal and emotional, and we understand that now. They wouldn't have understood that then. And the word I got in my mind was pioneer, and that's how Goldie would have seen himself, as a pioneer in